Welcome to Democracy 30. Now, national security is the very specific protection of a country's sovereignty, its citizens, its economy, and the integrity of its nation state. But how well has South Africa fared in its national security over the last 30 years? During apartheid, the state's interest was to protect the minority at the expense of the majority. But the post-apartheid democratic government sought to transform the way national security was brought about and its embrace of the new democratic values. However, with South Africa generally being a peaceful and stable country over the last 30 years, we have to ask the question, has state intelligence been up to scratch? Very specifically because it has received quite a number of criticisms and not being immune to political meddling over the last 30 years. My name is Oliver Dixon, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. Before we begin the conversation, let's take a look at what some South Africans had to say about how secure they think South Africa is from external threats.
Depends where I am. Not everywhere in South Africa.
I do not think it is safe, especially looking at the recent years and how crime has increased.
Mina njengoba ngila safe. Yeah, so I don't think South Africa is safe.
I'm not feeling safe anymore. It's evident with the numbers of crime that are happening around the city itself. So yeah, I don't think it's crime-free.
You don't even know who to trust anymore. Even if it's family or anyone, you don't know who to trust anymore.
There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of social security and all that. Yeah, and visible policing, I think it could make much more of a difference.
Where are the police to patrol around? If the government was serious, there's supposed to be a police around, even here in Braamfontein and around.
We've got law enforcement that are doing their best, and then there are other elements that are not doing well.
Nothing is safe in South Africa, and I feel like that's all has to do with the employment. The economy is not there. It's not open enough for us to actually be employed.
I'm a girl, so I'm not safe. Obviously, I'm not safe because you don't know how many people are looking at me, especially in a place like this. When I'm working alone, you don't know who's targeting me.
And joining me to have this conversation this evening is Mr. Andy Mashaile, who is a security analyst, as well as Ambassador Dennis Dlomo. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me. I perhaps want to start the conversation here, Ambassador, to start with you. South Africa has various law enforcement agencies and various structures assisting law enforcement. And collectively, that ecosystem is meant to keep us safe, both from domestic threats as well as external international threats. How well would you say we have fared in South Africa in protecting the integrity of our nation state?
It's 30 years of democracy and democratic rule. We are still standing. At the beginning of this democracy in 1994, there was violence that characterized the country. KwaZulu-Natal, people thought would never be stabilized. Parts of Gauteng were facing serious taxi violence. There was general violence in a number of hostels, and people were truly feeling unsafe. Buipatong was yet to happen, and it did happen. So the reality of it is that 30 years we are standing, it's peaceful, it's stable, the children go to school, workers go to work, preachers preach. So overall, the security services of the country have performed very well under the circumstances, despite the fact that we face real challenges with state capture and the aftermath of state capture, which we need to address as a nation. But overall, we are on point.
Speaking of state capture, Mr. Mashaile, there was a time South Africa was accused, or at least there was an accusation in South Africa that our state intelligence had been captured for political reasons rather than for the safekeeping of our country. How much truth was there to that criticism?
Oliver, good evening to you, and I dedicate my response to my high school teacher, Ntate Sello Kgalebe, for making me sit here one of these days. Oliver, people generate their own perceptions given rumor mongering, given what they perceive to have been part and parcel of the intelligence agencies having it been moved from left to right. And those individuals or those people would best be allowed to either keep those perceptions or be informed by the law enforcement agencies and the leadership of this country, explaining their behavior, explaining their mandate, and explaining very simple in a simple language to the people of this country so that they can understand what is going on with regard to the agencies that run intelligence, that gather intelligence, that manages threats, that go out there to do what you and I would call threat hunting, based on threat intelligence and managing those threats. Remember, these threats, when some of us sleep, like I slept yesterday at my mom's place in a certain township, this morning I woke up to a double murder in not very far away from my mom's house. Now, in the events of this nature, when people don't understand what happens in the thick of the night, law enforcement agencies get a blame. There can't be any police officer, there can't be a police officer at each and every house. So long story short, when law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies do not explain their mandate, not what they do, not even the success, not even the projects that they have, it becomes a free-for-all interpretation and blame attachment and performance management and assessment and results giving at the end of the day.
Yeah. Ambassador, you were also the former coordinator of the national intelligence structures. How much of what happens domestically, what we account for and look at as domestic criminal activities, can be linked to external threats?
I think let's contextualize. The main responsibility of the National Intelligence Coordinating Committee is to secure the country and to address national security threats. It's important to start there because there is a division of responsibility between intelligence and the South African Police Service, whose responsibility is to look after public safety and security. Insofar as the National Intelligence Coordinating Committee is concerned, the main preoccupation that we have is to make sure that there is internal security in the country, is to make sure that we address external threats, and we do this by undertaking assessments. We do a national intelligence estimate as a country. We also do national intelligence priorities, which tell us what threats we should be focusing on, what threats we should be addressing. So in the context of that, I can say that the work that we do is collaborative. We collaborate with our counterparts internationally in order to know what threats are coming from outside the country that are headed in our direction. We exchange capacity building ideas. We make sure that we are abreast with the new threats that emerge on a daily basis, and that we are equal to the task when those threats do manifest inside South Africa.
How well do we fare at that? South Africa, Pretoria and Johannesburg is a globally unique place in that it has one of the highest concentrations of diplomats outside of New York, right? And countries that often don't have good relations would have to mediate in South African territory. That is, if, for example, if the United States of America wanted to speak to North Korea, the only place where they could physically meet is South Africa, because South Africa would have presence from both those countries. And usually where there's a lot of diplomats, there are a lot of spies. So how well do we fare with warring countries being present in South Africa? It's got nothing to do with us, but they're doing their business here. How safe are we from that?
Well, we're very safe. Let me start by saying that there is a relative safety, which is subjective. And then there is safety, which is dependent on the functioning and the collaboration of the system. And I can tell you that with the various coordinating structures of government at an international level and at a domestic level, at intelligence level and at the security cluster level. There is a lot of work that is being done and done successfully on a regular basis, on a daily basis, I can dare to say.
Yeah.
So your net joints is quite critical in making sure that we respond collectively, strategically, and through intelligence-driven operations. So we don't go out of a gut feeling. We go there informed by intelligence that is at our disposal.
Yeah. Mr. Mashele, when you look at what happened recently in Limpopo with the bust of a drug lab reportedly coordinated by Mexican nationals, and you look at what happened in Mpumalanga just this week with a training camp where it was found 95 Libyan nationals were training for security purposes there, but the reports we're getting is that it looked more like military-based training rather than security training. And you look at the fact that we've been told that before that there are Al-Qaeda training camps here in South Africa every once in a while, that they have cells going on here, that there are people in the country that you can link to extremist groups like ISIS, and that they have the radicalization conversations around terrorism. Is it perhaps time that we inscribe the word terrorism into our conversations about national security of South Africa?
Maybe what we should, let's flip the coin, Oliver, and say, let us talk about terrorism awareness. And let us also indicate what terrorism is and how best our people, the ordinary man in the street, can identify signs and symptoms of what looks like that package that we would refer to as terrorism, so that the people can begin to play a significant role, not only check that responsibility and expect it to come from your law enforcement agencies, your intelligence agencies, but get people to cooperate with state, as well as share information, as well as ensure that in the process of us addressing what we are addressing now, terrorism, our people have a simple and basic understanding so that they can play a role. Now our people, and most of our people, wouldn't have a fully fleshed understanding of terrorism. That is why they will associate a number of things with that concept until we explain it better, we ask them to participate, and we stop that threat of terrorism. Obviously, it comes with awareness and education.
Yeah, the conversation is just heating up. We're going to bring you more on the other side of this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Democracy 30. Tonight we ask the question, how secure is South Africa 30 years into democracy from terror-related threats? And how well has state intelligence and its concomitant state functionaries like law enforcement done and fared in keeping us safe, both from domestic threats but also external international threats? In conversation with me this evening is Mr. Andy Mashele, who is a security analyst, as well as Ambassador Dennis Dlomo. Before we go back to the conversation, let's take a look at this graphic, which gives us a sense of some of the highlights of terror-related threats in South Africa since 1994. And perhaps to start here and point out to the fact that South Africa is a country that has a checkered past. And if you look at that 2010 incident where Avia Beer members were arrested for a planned attack before the 2010 FIFA World Cup, you would recall just how incredibly sensitive that moment was for South Africa, given that it ties very specifically to South Africa's pre-democratic past, right? But more importantly, in 2002, you would recall the United States Embassy here in Johannesburg issued a terrorist threat warning, which they days later retracted and apologized for alarming the country without providing much information around that. And importantly, in 2023, the Financial Action Task Force grey-listed South Africa. Amongst the criticisms in the 22 items that they grey-listed South Africa for was a criticism around South Africa's awareness of financial-related acts of transgression in the country, such as the funding of terrorist organizations. These are just but a few of the incidents that we have to take note of. And perhaps to come to this, Ambassador, you know, off air you told me something very interesting, which I think rings true so well, which is for every ordinary day that we have in South Africa, it demonstrates the extraordinary efforts that go into it, right? The fact that a bomb didn't go off randomly somewhere in the country or a plane wasn't shot out of the air is demonstrative of the work that's being done, coordinated and collaboratively between all our state agencies, including intelligence. Talk us through what that extraordinary effort looks like on a day-to-day. When you look at, for instance, Avia having threatened to derail South Africa's success moment in 2010.
There are a very number of ways in which we can approach this, but I will use what is in our statutes at the moment. We have a national intelligence estimate which looks at the security situation inside the country and look at how vulnerable we are to external threats. It highlights national intelligence priorities, which is the work that must be done by intelligence and security services of the country in addressing these challenges. So each and every organization on receiving the national intelligence priorities would come up with an operational plan, which plan will seek to deploy the assets they have under their control in order to make sure that they gather intelligence on those threats, get to know who is doing what, where, under what circumstances, and who are they collaborating with, who is funding them, to mention but a few areas. Yeah. And then that information is processed and threat assessments are given, strategies are developed based on that, and of course law enforcement would take place where law enforcement is actually needed. But there would be a collaboration of various operations at various levels in the state. Yeah.
Mr. Mashele, I want to take you back to 2021, right, the July unrest as we call it these days. A moment like that, one has to ask how much of it could have been prevented. We now see political matters playing out in very violent ways in South Africa, which is indicative of our past, not our present, right? We're a democratic state where you assume democratic principles will prevail. But when you look back to July 2021, how much of what happened in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng could have been prevented?
Oliver, when I go into the heart of the Human Rights Commission report on that subject, it tells you that they put the commissioners and those who are investigating the genesis as well as the revelation of the whole exercise. It tells you that law enforcement agencies was caught napping, and what I like about it is it recommends what needs to be done. In that course and space, if we had enough knowledge or resources to be able to pick up that intelligence that was available on what you and I call open source intelligence on your WhatsApps, on your Facebook, maybe we could have done better. In fact, we should have done better. Let me not water down the reports of the report of the Human Commission. It is Human Rights Commission. It is important that I stick to that and use it in this discussion. Law enforcement agencies, intelligence agencies, I am sure one and all who's in that space, us who are in the security strategy development and analysis and many of these things that the ambassador is referring to here, we could have prevented that. But
there was also an argument about the scale of the unrest and that we were just not well resourced for it. How much of our security vulnerabilities have to do with resourcing?
Hence, I spoke about resources. We didn't have enough resources congregated so that we can galvanize it to into a spear that would then be able to prick close the explosion or the unrest that would have happened. I am definitely sure that with the lessons that came, especially after the investigations and the recommendations, resources have now been prioritized to look at intelligence in its many facets, particularly on what you and I call open source. Open source would be social media. I'm definitely sure that we could do better. We didn't do better in 2021, but I'm sure when I say we, I'm talking about the agencies that are responsible for collecting information and enforcing the law.
Yeah. Ambassador Dlomo, has our institutions been compromised due to politicization, or is that mythical?
I think definitely, most definitely. All the investigations that have been conducted, starting with the report presented by Professor Sandy Africa, the report by Professor Sidney Mufamadi, and Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, all of those investigations have really come out clearly and stated that intelligence has been factionalized and politicized along the factions that were dominant at the time in the African National Congress. So that reality is something no one can deny. What we need to be looking at is what steps are we taking in order to make sure that we are out of the woods when it comes to that factionalism and that politicization.
Is and I'm glad to say, a threat, given that we now have a different politics in the country?
I don't think that that it is still a threat, but I believe that the work that has been done by the 6th administration has not really been completed. The General Intelligence Laws Amendment Bill has indeed been passed by the houses. It was with the president. Now the line has gone under it. It has not been signed into law. We are in the 7th administration, and ordinarily what that means is that the law must now go back to Parliament. And I'm glad that there is an opportunity to go back to Parliament, because that work was a bit rushed. There wasn't sufficient public consultation. And I think that in the context of the national dialogue, the issues that are being addressed and that have been raised by the 3 structures that I referred to that investigated intelligence, we need to re-legitimize our intelligence services. They've lacked legitimacy for a long period of time. The last change of intelligence into state security was done outside the constitutional framework. It was done outside of the ethos and ethics, the modus operandi stated in the white paper on intelligence, amongst other things.
Should they be separated? Is that what you're proposing?
They definitely must be separated. It was not by accident that we came up at the beginning of this dispensation with 2 separate intelligence services, the National Intelligence Agency and the South African Secret Service. In 2002, we made major changes again to the dispensation because of the threats that we encountered. In that regard, we said we needed an independent South African Intelligence Academy, which will teach intelligence and make sure that people, as is required by the Constitution, by the way, in Section 199, it expressly states that intelligence must teach and seek to ensure that members of intelligence services do understand working in a constitutional democracy and operate in that context. So factionalism and politicization undermine those principles contained in our constitutions that govern intelligence.
Does the concentration, Mr. Maishele, of intelligence and state securities congruently into the presidency add to the legitimacy of it or detract from it?
It both has benefits and risks for the president and for the higher office. It becomes, for the benefits, it becomes a major good tool for the operations that account directly to the president, and many other things that would add value, many other things that would be referred to as successes that we can't talk about here, that no one can talk about now. It also has the risks of individuals who might go rogue and do the opposite of what it would serve in the form of benefits when centralized in the office of the president. Am I saying that it should be independent from the office of the president? No. I'm saying as long as it benefits the safety and the security of the state, on the one hand, as long as it ensures that those who are operating in that system toe the line and do what is prescribed by the relevant and attending legislation to the intelligence operations or intelligence organizations.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's where we're going to have to leave it. That's all we have time for this evening. But Ambassador Dhlomo, thank you so much for your time and your insights. I really do appreciate it. Mr. Mashaile, it's always a pleasure speaking to you and helping us make sense of these issues. That's where we leave it for today. Let us know what your thoughts are. You can go on to X and find us at SABC News, #Democracy30. Do you feel secure? And does this conversation help you understand just how complex it is to keep a country like South Africa secure? For myself and the team, it's good night for now. We're back with you next week. Good night.